Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
We're going to get right away to Darwin Porter and see what he has to say today. Good morning, Darwin.
Good morning, Anita. Nice to talk to you, and I want to live up to my billing and tell you some stuff that you won't hear on TV and radio.
Okay.
I want to get right to it because it's sort of a quick nutshell history of presidential sex scandals did not begin with Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. Of course,
Okay.
those two made second coming headlines in all the tabloids with their diversions, but it really began with a couple named Martha and George. Of course, she was above reproach, like Caesar's wife, but George wasn't. Now, a lot of people don't know it, but he was her second husband. Her name was Martha Dandridge, and she married Daniel Custis, and he was 25 years her senior. They got married in 1750, but he died 7 years later, leaving her with what she called 2 brats and 300 slaves. She was the wealthiest woman in the colonies, and George was a very ambitious, young, poor, struggling colonel in the army, and he pursued her. They think for her money because she really helped him ultimately become president. And he found her fat and dumpy, but he married her. His real love was a very beautiful woman named Sally Fairfax, and she lived close to him in Mount Vernon, and they've been lovers for years. In fact, they were still, according to a letter that Martha later burned, he was still carrying on his affair with Sally up until his death.
Did you say burned?
No, up until his death.
No, before that.
The letters, the love letters were burned.
Oh.
Martha did not want to preserve them for history. And during when he became the commander during the American Revolutionary War, he saw very little of Martha for 8 years. He did have a 2-day stopover in Mount Vernon, however, but he was rumored to have impregnated 3 Indian squaws. I know that's politically incorrect today, but that's what they were called back then. And
did they have children, though? Did Martha and...
Yes.
Oh,
no. Martha and George never had any children, and that led... Now, this is the most incredible rumor. The British soldiers spread a rumor that because they did not have children, that George Washington was really a woman dressed in men's clothes. Well, you know how rumors go, right?
Oh, my heavens. Okay.
Now, there was another rumor spread about George Washington. First, he was known for having incredibly large hands and an 18-inch shoe size. And every 3 days, this lieutenant bathed him every 3 days. Of course, some people back then bathed once a week, if that. And he also, the lieutenant spread the word among his soldiers that his hands and feet were the only thing big about General Washington.
There we go.
Now, we didn't hear that kind of talk until Senator Marco Rubio, running against Donald Trump, talked about Trump's small hands, and Trump had to defend his penis size before millions of Americans against Rubio's attack on him. But moving on, George Washington was a great womanizer. He seduced everyone from Aaron Burr's wife to the goddaughter of Benjamin Franklin, and he sometimes seduced the wives of his generals, and he had a permanent mistress stashed away in Hoboken, New Jersey, the future home of Frank Sinatra. And his point of view was, he went on record, he said, once you taste forbidden fruit, there is no turning back. And during his presidency, he slipped as much women in and out of the White House as John F. Kennedy did.
This is amazing stuff. How come how come no one ever hears of this?
Well, you see, they didn't teach it in History 101. But you know that I've written books on 5 U.S. presidents and 4 first ladies, often in the same book. So I've followed. Well, I'm a Hollywood writer, but I don't know. Somehow presidents and their first ladies have always fascinated me ever since I was a little boy growing up in Miami. Anyway, a lot of people don't know how George ended his life, which was in 1799. He had this black beauty stationed in the slave quarters in Mount Vernon, and he saw her regularly. And but he also fancied the wife. This was a white woman, a wife of his overseer. And when the overseer he thought was driving up to Washington, he came back unexpectedly, and George was in bed with his wife, and he heard him come in, so he jumped out the window, and it was almost below zero, and that night, or early the next morning, George caught a horrible cold and died.
Really? So they, in history, attributes him just to dying from being sick, right?
Because he was running around. What did Trump's mistress call? He said tidy whities. He was running around in sub-degree zero weather in his tidy whities, and that ended our founding father.
This is, you've never written a column on any of this. I love this story. You have to think about it. This is fantastic.
Now, I want to go on to Thomas. We'll jump ahead. We could talk all morning about Thomas Jefferson. I want to bring him, the drafter of our Constitution, who became president in 1801 as a Republican. And he also took a wife named Martha. But unlike Martha Washington, Jefferson's Martha was a fabled beauty. And they had 6 children together. 4 of them died in infancy, and he never remarried. But when he was 18 years old, he had fallen in love with a married woman named Betsy Walker, and he pursued her for years, and she consistently rejected him. And then one night when her husband was out of town, Thomas Jefferson, like George, seemed to move in when the husbands are out of town. And he broke into Betsy's bedroom and attempted to rape her, and then she fought him off with a pair of scissors. And then, of course, he went into the presidency a bachelor again, a widower, and his enemies said he brought so many black mistresses into the White House, they were called slave concubines, that he turned the White House into a Congo harem.
Oh, my heavens.
And, of course, he was Jefferson is famous for his long affair with a slave named Sally Hemings, and they fathered 5 children together. But a lot of people, she's viewed as an African American, but technically she was what's called a quadroon, which means 1/4 black. And
is that the term mulatto? The same thing?
That would be half.
Oh, I see.
Half black, and a quadroon would be a quarter. Well, quad, I guess. Sally's father had been an English sea captain, and many of the Jefferson offspring are alive today. And sometimes they give interviews. Now, I want to skip on now to Andrew Jackson, which is his he became president in 1829. But, you know, his portrait hangs over the desk of Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And
that's very funny.
when he was 18, he moved to Salisbury, North Carolina, and he became, as a teenager, he became such a rowdy kind of guy, organizing a gang, and he went after so many wives that husbands barred him from their homes, and he was called rollicking, roaring, game-cocking, horse racing, card-playing devil, and he specialized in, here we go again, now we're back to mulatto, in mulatto mistresses. And he raised $300, and he purchased a young black woman named Nancy, and he turned her into his first sex slave. And but one day he met Rachel, and she was smoking her corn cob pipe, and apparently was quite ugly. But he fell for her really big time. The only problem was she was married to a guy called Louis Robards, and so she was already married. But they ran away to New Orleans, and they got married down there. But there was a trouble. That was in the summer of 1791. But she had filed for divorce from Robards, but the divorce was not at all final. It had not been granted. So in technically that would make them bigamists. And all that had to be settled and ironed out, and then they had to get remarried.
I have to ask you a question with all this going on. How did the public know about this?
Yes, well, these were not with the kind of 24-hour news coverage we get today, but these were, if not written up in the paper, you know, all this was spread by their enemies. I'm amazed that you see, I think a lot has to do with the way history is taught. These mostly, when I heard about George Washington when I was a little boy, it was he did not tell a lie and chop down the cherry tree. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't hear about all these other things because, but the enemies did spread these rumors, and that's why we know of them today. I think I could go into after Rachel died. She died months before he took the presidency, and so Jackson really mourned her. After that wild youth, he mourned her until the day he died. But he was really, Old Hickory was later nicknamed Old Sickory because in his last days, he was really in no condition to take on a woman. He had these constant bouts of painful diarrhea and persistent headaches and breathing problems. He had breathing problems because he was in a duel in 1806 with Charles Dickinson, not the Charles Dickens, the writer, Charles Dickinson, and he had the first shot, and the bullet landed right under Andrew Jackson's heart. And you know that bullet was never removed. He died with that bullet in his chest.
Amazing.
And so he had swollen feet and rotting teeth, and so he turned to liquor and both smoking and chewing tobacco.
Okay, so my question is, how could he run the country?
Well, that is the question to be answered.
Oh my heavens! It's amazing that the character is so bad.
Well, but Jackson, appears on the $20 bill. But beginning the last 2 years, there's been a great movement in this country to take him off the $20 bill. I always loved those $20 bills myself, but preferred 100.
Right.
Anyway, now I want to tell you something that no one ever talks about. Jackson was followed in office by a sort of protege of his named Martin Van Buren. Now, he became president in 1837. That's a name you don't hear very much. But do you know Martin Van Buren was largely responsible for the creation of the Democratic Party? And he was married to a woman named Hannah. But, absolutely nothing is known about this Hannah. She died of TB when she was 36, and Van Buren wrote an autobiography, and he did not mention Hannah one time in his biography. Now, Ronald Reagan, in his autobiography, at least gave Jane Wyman 4 lines. He was married to Jane Wyman, as you know, for 8 years, and Reagan devoted 4 lines to Jane in his autobiography. But Van Buren didn't even mention his wife, and they had 5 children together. They got married in 1807. But so he ended a bachelor in the White House, and Van Buren was known to flirt with all the women, the beautiful belles of his day, but he later said that he wasn't flirting for them for sex, but he liked to catch up on the female gossip of the day.
Oh, my heavens.
And he was enamored of his Secretary of War, John C. Calhoun, and he told friends that Calhoun was exceptional in all departments. That is, until he met a young congressman named John Randolph and began spending his nights with him. And he claimed that Randolph was even more exceptional than John C. Calhoun. But
stop. I want to ask you a question. At that time in life, how did people feel about gay people?
Well, they hardly knew. It was almost never mentioned. You know, it was certainly gay. It was really just never mentioned. It was, but yet there were rumors. They had a funny way of calling it. They called it like Carl Sandburg when he was writing about Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Fry Speed. He called it, there was a scent of lavender in the air. So sometimes they said lavender. They still do it, but only old-fashioned people. I wanted to say one thing about Van Buren, though. He was the most stylish dresser ever to occupy the White House. He preferred, like, velvet collars and orange silk panties and lace tips and pearl-hued vest and white duck trousers and coats, but only in the color of snuff. And his silk hosiery was shipped in from Paris. But his vice president, Richard Johnson, was quite different. He had inherited a black slave named Julia from his father, and they had several. They don't know how many mulatto children, but when she got a little too old, he took another black mistress in Washington when he was vice president, but she ran off with an Indian chief. I'm not making this up.
You know, are you sure you're really... This is a great makeup story.
Yeah, but then he took another black mistress and was with her the day he died. He was never renominated for vice president because the word got out. And I think we have a quick time. Then James Buchanan followed, and he was president in 1857, right before Lincoln. And Lincoln is a whole story in itself. And like Van Buren, he was a bachelor. He never married, and he became involved with a senator from Alabama, William Rufus King, and their relationship lasted 23 years.
Huh.
And the senators called them Miss Nancy and Aunt Fancy.
My heavens.
And so Let's see. Well,
while you're looking, I just have to say, why wouldn't you do a book on all of this? This would really sell, especially now in the environment we live in. I think this is very powerful. I really mean that.
I've only spent 60 years probing. I started when I told you once I'm the president of the Chester A. Author fan club, which is down now to about 28 members. I became at the University of Miami. I started studying. I was assigned to do him for while working for a degree. The professor assigned who you could write about, and so I started getting interested in presidents then. But that doesn't mean I think you're right. I think a lot of people.
Oh, yes.
I have tons of this stuff.
Yes. I think this would be your next great book because it's so interesting.
But I think it would attract people because it involves also Eisenhower. A lot of people don't know about his sex life and with his aide. Although she later wrote a book, but it didn't get a lot of publicity. And the one that didn't get publicity at the time, of course, would be John F. Kennedy.
Oh, and, right.
I mean, but not during his. It was only rumored. Now, it's odd. We spoke of presidential penises. Can you imagine we're talking about this? But
presidential penises. Great name for the book, right?
That didn't come into prominence after George Washington until another challenger assumed the presidency, and that was Lyndon B. Johnson.
Really?
And he was a self-advertisement for what he told everybody was jumbo. There was a recent movie made about him, and there's one scene in the movie where he tells his friends gathered in the Oval Office, he said, I have to order my tailors to make extra room in the crotch for jumbo.
No kidding. That's good. Oh, my gosh.
And, Clinton was accused of having a fellatio performed on him in the Oval Office.
Of course.
But Jumbo was known for seducing women in the Oval Office. And some women reported that he crawled in their bed and said, don't worry, it's okay. I'm your president. It's funny that all the concentration about womanizing was on Kennedy, but Johnson may have had him beat, except Kennedy dated famous women. I mean, not always, but...
and he was very attractive.
Yeah, he was known for his to my knowledge, in my research, I've written books about, there are only two women who slept with both Kennedy and Reagan. And they were Marilyn Monroe and Lana Turner. I wrote a book about her.
Right.
I knew her since the 70s. I've told you that many times. And she made a comparison between the two. And she said, Kennedy was a 2-minute man, and Reagan was a 40-minute man.
Oh, well, that's a good way for us to end, and I just love this show. Boy, this is a surprise, and I want everyone to... Wait, let me just say, the best movies of 2017's coming out in our February issue. Be sure to read it. Darwin wrote a fantastic story. You'll want to see a lot of those movies. Thank you, Darwin, so much.
It's so good. I just hope we won't be censored.
No, you won't be censored. Okay.
Okay.
Bye, Darwin.